Greetings, sailors, and welcome back to a Patreon World of Warships replay. I know it's been a little while since I've put up anything other than the podcast videos, but what can I say? Depression. It sucks, yo. I think there might be an element of seasonal affective disorder. I am at 58 degrees north after all. I know there are probably some people watching this that are even further north than this, but for Scotland that's fairly far north. There's not that much of Scotland, or indeed the UK, that is more northerly. There's basically the very top of Scotland, which is Caithness, and then you have the Northern Isles themselves of the Orkneys and the Shetlands, which for some reason Jingles keeps mistakenly saying I'm from one of those. I think it's the Shetlands. I don't know. He keeps getting his Western Isles and his Northern Isles mixed up. Anyway, that's all by the by. This is the Błyskawica. It's being driven by PointyHairedJedi, and this is a fairly old school premium at this point. I mean, it's been moved around in terms of where it's at on a tech tree a bit since it came in, and it's also had a couple of minor-ish buffs, but I think overall it's been relatively untouched, and it definitely does feel like one of those ships that has been power crept. I think its main deficiency still in my eyes is the fact that it's got a pretty bad concealment for its tier, and although it is a kind of European flavoured ship, I mean, when all the destroyers came out, the Swedish destroyers, they could potentially have bumped up the AA on this thing, because that's one of the notable achievements of the Błyskawica during World War II, was helping provide AA defence for, was it Cowes? Was it the Isle of Wight? I think so. I mean, geographically that would make sense, but yeah, there's nothing in-game that really kind of, you know, says, hey, good AA. It's pretty average for the tier. One of the changes they did make was it used to have, I think, only like 7 kilometers of torp range on top of its 6.8 concealment, and that did get a bit better, but the 6.8 concealment is still fairly bad. It's not a bad gunboat for its tier. You've got a nice barrel count, but it's not great at it. It's kind of fast, but it's certainly outclassed in that regard. The concealment obviously is fairly terrible, although that's like there are other tier 7 destroyers that have terrible concealment, which frankly is something that I've long said could be looked at. The tier 7 concealment levels are generally, it's pretty wild the variation there is in that one tier, and it's only when, I mean, these days at the higher tiers, when you've got your, you know, French and Russian destroyers that are lighthouse builds kind of thing, where you're not building for concealment even slightly, obviously there can be a bigger gap, but yeah, it's still like you've got the Hydra at this tier with what, 5 point something kilometers, and then you've got this and I think something else at 6.8, which is quite a wide gap in terms of destroyer concealment, considering that most of them don't really have the advantage of being able to have truly long-range guns. You've only got the captain skills. You don't also have the ability to put on the equipment at tier 7, or in fact even tier 8 really. Or do you at tier 8? Actually you do for some, yeah, you do at tier 8, but I think not every single national line gets to bump up its range. Or is it tier 9 and 10 I'm thinking of that with that sticks slot? I really should have checked that, but on the other hand, I wasn't really, like, this isn't where my thoughts were going that I was going to be talking about. It's just where I've ended up talking about, because my brain is like that, and rambling is, you know, the thing that I do. So, there was a bit of luck involved, I think, with sneaking down the flank. That was a particularly inattentive Shikaku player, especially considering that he did briefly give his position away by taking a pot shot as he was going around that island. But the carrier took absolutely no notice, hadn't even thought to get moving, for the fact that, like, even if PointyHairedJedi hadn't been here, he's still got a bunch of allies that are advancing on this cap, and that Shikaku was just sat there quite blithely, and yeah, it really was their complacency that actually let Piritskenyi get the kill with the torps, because he didn't even do any leading. He dumped his torps on the marker, which obviously is fine for a stationary target, but normally a more aware carrier player will go, oh shit, I'd better get moving, and even just the distance, the what is it, like maximum 8 kilometers away, it wasn't even that. There is enough time to generally get out of the way of most, if not all, but like I say, that carry would have been doomed even if that had happened. This is not a superintendent captain, by the way. The Polish smoke is, I think, fairly average. I can't remember if it's the same as the Japanese smoke, but it's nothing special, and you only get 3 charges of it without superintendent, which clearly Piritskenyi does not have. I'm pretty sure he's got secondary expert, though. This does have a decent amount of health for being a tier 7, but especially this kind of bottom tier matchup where you've not really got the speed or the concealment, you don't have a heal or anything like that, you have to be particularly canny when dealing with scary looking opponents like that Tashkent. I mean, the Z39 not so much, but that Tashkent, that's not a fight Piritskenyi really wants to get into, and he's actually going to take the decision here to pop a smoke to break concealment. And this is another way in which this thing, I think, could be buffed. Maybe some of the other tier 7s that have poor concealment is maybe give them an extra smoke charge. I mean, this one in particular, I think you could quite comfortably give it an extra smoke charge by default and not make it broken in any way, because it just has such poor concealment. Even in its own tier, but especially in down tier situations, it needs really every trick to survive, and you know, smoke is part of that, and if you only have 3 of them, you have to choose when to use them quite carefully. And Piritskenyi's already, you know, used 2 of them in a fairly tactical manner. He maybe didn't have to use it for going for the Shikaku, but he played it safe there, I guess. But yeah, he's now only got 1 left, and that might be an issue. While this has all been going on, there's been a hefty amount of trading between both teams, and the result is 2 caps each, and the enemy team controls the west half of the map, and this team controls the east half of the map, although there is a Johan de Witt going for the northernmost cap, or the northeasternmost cap, which is a bit of a bold move, because there's a bunch of ships there in the middle that are clearly suddenly taking an interest in the cruiser that's trying to head to the cap. Note that the friendly Lexington has done the opposite of that Shikaku and actually looked at the minimap and seen the enemy ships moving around and thought, maybe I should move myself. So if you are going to play a carrier, if you must, and I must admit occasionally sometimes even I do, although mostly in co-op, and mostly for things like the snowflake events, but sometimes in the scenarios as well, can be quite relaxing. Yeah, what was I saying? Oh, so yeah, don't forget that you can move around in your CV. You are not a static airfield. So the whole point of carriers is that, you know, they could move, and they weren't confined to things that can't move, like islands. Anyhow, this is looking sort of even at the moment. I mean, I think they have, what, 1 less ship, the enemy team, but they have more points. It's not a huge lead, though. It's definitely not a huge lead. And so everyone has to be a bit careful not to do anything too silly. And Piritskenyi kind of did there. He took a sneaky shot at the Tashkent, but he was still within gun range of those other ships over there, the Tallinn and that, what is that, Scharnhorst? Can't quite, it's squeezed a bit on my screen. So, yeah, that maybe wasn't quite 100% the smartest move. One thing I don't know, just looking at this, which I would have to throw up the replay again to figure out, is if he's got the gun range extending captain skill, which would definitely give you a bit more reaction time. But I think even with the extra hit points of secondary expert, it's not the most survivable build. Honestly, if it was me, I would probably rather have superintendent and the extra smoke from that. But yeah, it's like there's no perfect Błyskawica build by any means. It's kind of an awkward ship to play, even if it does still have relatively nice firepower for tier 7. I mean, it's got 4 twin turrets. You absolutely can't complain about the firepower. The DPM isn't that great, but you can at least put out a pretty decent number of shots. I mean, to put that into comparison, you know, that's the same barrel count as the Cossack has at tier 8, and I think it's the same caliber as well. There's 120 mils on this thing. And, you know, this thing is inarguably a better torpedo boat than the Cossack, just because it has more. So he did try a little drop, but, I mean, his position was pretty well known at that point, so the Scharnhorst put on the brakes. It's definitely in range of that Scharnhorst's secondaries and well within spotting range, so he's just pew-pewing all the while, and the Scharnhorst has been trying to get his turrets around, but there's been at least more than enough time to get into cover. So the Scharnhorst actually has kind of wasted their time doing that. I mean, they were clearly hoping to get a shot off, but as it is, that actually rather helps his allies, because, you know, that's a good 30 plus seconds to turn the turrets there and have to turn them back again, so that has bought his allies some time. But he is rapidly running out of allies because, yeah, they're starting to die off a bit. And it's just the Zeton that's kind of there now, facing off against basically the entire rest of the enemy ships. However, the carry is still plugging away, and the Alaska B, interestingly, has decided to go for the A cap. I'm not quite sure why, but it is helping to stem the bleeding on point. In fact, well, it's not even bleeding at this point. They had 3 or 4 caps anyway. And I guess the Alaska can probably get shots on most things from there. That is bad news, though. The Tashkent's still alive and kicking, and they are in this cap. So dump the torps out, and let's hope we don't get into any gunfight with them, because, quite frankly, unless they're very low health, and I don't know if we got that good of a look at them, but I didn't seem like they were that far off health-wise. Yeah, it's not really a fight that you want in a Błyskawica, because you're probably not going to win. However, even though as you can see, the Tashkent had dumped their torps out on this side, they didn't apparently figure on PointyHairedJedi doing exactly the same on the other side, and actually ran smack bang into one of said torpedoes, which was enough to finish them off. So that really was the last big threat that PointyHairedJedi had to deal with. And although the Zeton has gone down, and although the enemy team is now trying to cap C, yeah, it's a bit late. There's not really any way the enemy team is going to turn this around. In fact, all that's left now is this very, very low health Scharnhorst, and they're lower health enough that PointyHairedJedi feels safe to have a little pew-pew, maybe set a fire. That's, what, 13 plus kilometers? I think he must have the captain range skill, whatever it's called. Anyhow, it actually is a fire that he's luckily set. These are not particularly high fire chance that gets the Scharnhorst. But, I mean, the Scharnhorst would have died to the carrier if not for that anyway. Their DCP must have been on cooldown from the carrier's attacks. So that was a lucky last kill. He is definitely not going to get a cracking out of this, however. They are about to win on points, and though there is this rune left that's managed to flip the B cap all too late, it's not going to matter. In fact, PointyHairedJedi is trying to get a cheeky last shot there, but yeah, no dice. So, 91k. I think it's more impressive, honestly, that he managed to come out of that alive, and not even just alive, but top of the score screen in a tier 7 destroyer, in the Błyskawica, no less, in a tier 9 game. That would almost be a little easier in something like the Mayhem, to be honest, which has got better smokes, longer range torps. They're not as fast, but having the longer range to work with, especially when you're seeing more radars and whatnot, is certainly a useful feature. It's not like 8 kilometers is hugely bad for tier 8, but yeah, it's kind of, tier 7 even. but it's not great. There are others that have, I think, tier 8 or even slightly less range than that. Well, not counting the 4 kilometers of the, what is it at tier 8 these days, the Kiev? Or is that tier 8 now? I can't remember. Anyway, enough rambling. You can tell I'm sort of out of practice at this. I do have another Patreon replay that's been sent to me. In fact, I've got 2, and one of them's World of Tanks, so I've got an excuse to actually start pulling my finger out a bit. And also, we've got to keep Sam in the good cat food, right? Right, Sam? Yeah, he's been curled up on the desk next to me this entire time. You've been my able production assistant, haven't you? Anyway, so that's it for this game. Hopefully you enjoyed it, and if you did, you can do all the usual things down underneath the video. And of course, as always, stay tuned for more.